How are you doing, my friend? Hope you're having a good day. We're just about to get started. It's going to be a very different stream tonight. Very different from what we're used to. I will not be raiding, at least for the first couple of hours. My guild, I'll probably be repeating this a few times just so people know what's going on, but my guild that I'm in, Reborn of Embers, that I do a lot with, is hosting what we're calling a Masterclass, which is a series of events being taught by very experienced raiders who fill a certain role or position within our raid. So it's really cool. We're going to have people that know what they're talking about, basically going into great detail into like how best to play that role or that class. So far, we have done a Druid Masterclass being taught by one of the most experienced Druids that I know. And then a raid leading or raid hosting masterclass for those who need to know how to set up a raid, various things that you need to do to form a raid, how group composition works, how best to set up subgroups, that kind of stuff. But tonight is going to be the very first ever DPS version of the masterclass. So it's going to be a two-part series. We're going to do it tonight and do it again on Thursday, going into great detail about how best to what we're calling greed responsibly. How best to get good damage in a raid that is in excess to just performing your rotation perfectly in the SFTA at a golem. As far as I'm concerned, that's really only 50% of what it takes to get good damage in a raid, and not a lot of emphasis is given to the rest of it. So we're going to go into great detail about various fights, what needs to be taken into consideration to mitigate mechanics, how best to do damage while dealing with mechanics, precasting, intros, changes, augments to your rotations, all sorts of good stuff. So if you guys are interested in this, maybe you'll be able to learn something too, and that'll be really cool.
Okay, you about ready to go, Merrick?
Oh yeah. No, I'm good.
Cool. Okay, welcome everyone to the DPS Masterclass. This is also known as Greeting Responsibly. So in this, I normally do master classes. However, I am a support main. Many of you already know that. So DPS is not my forte, which is why I have two co-hosts with me here, Merrick and Cryptic, who are far better DPSers than I. I will be going into some theoretical things, some general tips and tricks, and they will be able to give you fill in the gaps and give you more build specific tips, stuff like that that I am unable to give you. So let us begin. I have three general tips. This masterclass, by the way, it's going to be split into two. So tonight it's only an hour and a half, and then there is a part two that will be taking place on Thursday. That one will probably be mostly covering specific tips for the bosses, but this one is the general part where we are beginning. So 3 tips. The first one, really big one, be mindful of your modifiers. So there are many different modifiers. They're pretty much always in the form of traits or have something to do with traits. So when you are picking up a new DPS build, I would encourage you to always look over all your traits, even the minor ones, to see what you need to do your maximum amount of damage. I've kind of divided these into 4 different categories, so I'm going to talk about each one and give you some examples. So the first one is your unavoidable modifiers. These are usually condition-based modifiers. They're generally nigh impossible not to have by doing your rotation or in a normal squad composition. There are harder ones to achieve, but some examples. Cold Shoulder, this is a Reaper minor trait. Chill lasts longer, and chilled foes take more damage from your attacks. So chill is a super common condition, and as a Reaper, like, you are inflicting a ton of chill, so you will pretty much always have the thing chilled, so it's pretty unavoidable that you always upkeep this damage modifier. Another example, serrated stones. It's elementalist earth tier 1. Bleeding you inflict has increased duration, and you deal increased damage to bleeding foes. This is in your Condi Weaver and I believe Condi Tempest builds. Again, bleed, super common condition. So the favorite one that is a lot more uncommon is slow. You need this on power chronomancers, but there are always ways to get around this as far as squad comp. But this sort of launches me into one thing, which is choosing DPS builds for a boss. So if you notice you have Condi RR, which is 2 condition renegades that are providing alacrity, or if you just have, even 1 condition renegade, those would be more optimal circumstances to play a power chrono in. Power chronos also generate some of their own slow, and other classes generate slow as well, and it's still worth bringing the trait that requires you to have slow on a power chrono, even if your slow uptime is abysmally low. But if it is abysmally low, there might be something else you could play more effectively that would better suit your circumstances, so keep those things in mind. The second kind of modifier I'm going to talk about, inherent but conditional modifiers. So these will naturally trigger when something happens. So they're basically always deal increased damage based on the health percentage of the boss. So my favorite examples of this are Unsuspecting Strikes, it's Revenant Devastation Tier 1. Deal increased damage to foes with health above the health threshold. That health threshold is 80%. So this will always trigger as long as the boss is over 80%. There's no getting around that, but you should still be aware of it. And then you have Swift Termination.
You're not
TC,
wrong,
this is also
Flav.
a Revenant trait. Deal increased damage to foes below the health threshold, and that is 50%. So on something like an Alacrity Aid, you have a very weird area between 80% and 50% where you are not doing as much damage as you would normally. There's no way of getting around this, and you should always continue your rotation as normal. Just be aware of it so you know why there's spikes in your rotation at certain points and when your rotation will pick up. The third type, skill-based modifiers. These are ones in your rotation that your rotation takes advantage of. So it is your job to be aware of these. So if you get lost in your rotation, if you need to alter your rotation, anything like that, you can, know where you're going wrong. You can be able to adjust to suit the boss more, things like that. These are the modifiers that you're really gonna see huge damage increases. So some examples: Elements of Rage.
Anyway, I
Weaver,
can't
tier
stay.
3.
It's at my first
Gain a
meeting of
damage
the day,
bonus
and
for a
5 hours
period
sleep
of
is
time
getting
when
rare these
attuned
days. Off
to a
Flav.
single
I
element.
know it's so late for you, bro.
So
Thanks for
there
stopping
are
by, man.
times, obviously, you have dual attuning.
Really appreciate it.
As a Weaver,
Have a great
and
night.
then you will attune singly, and that is when this trait will trigger. So when the trait triggers, you don't want to be just using your auto attack. You want to be doing other things to take advantage of this damage bonus. Different example: Big Game Hunter, Dragon Hunter tier 3, striking an enemy tethered by your Spear of Justice, that's your F1, inflicts vulnerability and increases damage dealt. This is where the most damage on a Dragon Hunter comes from. This is where you want your big bursts to line up. So if you get lost in your rotation and you're just kind of sitting there and you're like, I don't know what to do, but I do know that I have to use my F1, use your F1, and then, oh look, your skill bar is pretty much blacked out. Everything's on cooldown. All you can do is auto attack. Not good. You really want to have, a trap, a symbol,
Danny boy,
some
what's
good
up,
stuff
dude?
to be able to take advantage.
I feel like I've been hanging out with you all day.
Burst window. The final modifier, these are shared damage modifiers. These are probably the trickiest ones. These are skills you use that boost the damage of you and your allies. You should know when to use these, how to change your build to take advantage of them if necessary, and how the damage works. That is, who it's credited to, if there's an ICD, etc., etc. Probably the most famous one is One Wolf Pack. It's shared with the trait Leader of the Pack, Soul Beast, tier 3. Different example would be Ashes of the Just, Firebrand, Tome 1-5. So all of these work in different ways. I can't give you they all work the same way. So highly encourage you to look them up on the wiki or Google them,
Oh no, MaericTV
and so on
facts.
and so forth to see how they work. Also, if you watch my
Merrick now
raid
has
commanding
2
masterclass,
webcams,
I really go into
which
a
he
lot of
has
detail
intentionally
on
turned
these
off before streaming.
modifiers,
I have 3 now.
because it's sort of
Turn them all
essential
up.
to work your squad comp around skill-based modifiers like one wolf pack, and know when you should and should not change subgroups, and if it's even worth it to have them in some cases. So that was my first thing. Merrick and Cryptic, any tips or general words about modifiers?
Yeah, so all of that is really, really good information to know. A lot of it just kind of goes on in the background, especially in regards to skill modifiers. I think that a lot of people know that this kind of stuff, or maybe don't know that this kind of stuff is in your rotation. Even though you know how to do your rotation, you're not really sure why it is the way that it is. But that the goal of the rotation is to be taking advantage of these things as well as can be. So sometimes just taking the time to look over your skills independently, and I'm really guilty of this myself. I fully admit I'll play a DPS and even do well on that DPS for weeks or even months at a time, and then finally one day be like, you know what, maybe I should read what all my skills do. Because I'm just used to doing them in a certain order in the SFTA, and then I bring that into raids and I just do that. I do it sort of as I see it in the video, in the benchmark, and it's fine. But when you really learn how these modifiers work, all of a sudden I go, oh, hey, maybe I should be in a different subgroup. Maybe I know to ask something different before I start a raid, or I know to hold on to a skill. If I'm just about to hit a modifier or just about to hit some sort of class mechanical transition that a trait is applying, like a certain percentage of HP on a boss, like Phoenix was saying, then I know to make an adjustment because I better understand how my skills work. So sometimes just taking the time to go over every trait that's in your build, every skill that's in your rotation, can yield something that you may not have previously known. Now, this is tough without examples, but I think you'll find that you might learn a thing or two about maybe why your rotation is the way that it is, or maybe something to change going forward, which is really nice.
Yeah,
Knob, what's up, dude?
Kind of along the same vein, not just with modifiers, but like Merrick said, just taking time to go over your build and understanding the skills in general. There are a lot of little things with skills that people in raids are capitalizing, good DPS players are capitalizing on, that may be the difference between your DPS and theirs. And as an example, like Blade Burst on Hollowsmith, that is a multi-hit.
Good, man, good.
It is a multi-hit.
It's good to see you, Knob.
If you're standing in the hitbox of the boss...
Sorry, guys. It's going to be a little bit of a weird stream.
There's other enemies nearby, and I activate that. All those projectiles are going to get intercepted by the boss. So instead of just doing, 800 damage to the boss, instead I'm doing 8 times 5 now. And those are little things like that that you wouldn't understand if you didn't go over your build. But then when you go over your build, you're like, oh, maybe if I wait a second until the mobs respawn or that seeker gets close in VG, then I'm going to activate Blade Burst and, I'll get that extra damage. And delaying it that few seconds can absolutely make big differences.
That's such a big one, dude. And I swear so few people know that. That's an interesting one where essentially that skill is generating additional projectiles if there are more ads around you. And it will shoot towards those ads. But as Cryptic said, if you're inside the hitbox, it doesn't matter where they were aiming. They're going to be intercepted by the boss and do additional damage. That is like a hidden gem for something that a lot of people could go a very long time without knowing. I went a very long time without knowing that. That's an interesting one for sure. I want to touch on that too, because that is such a really big part of this. How is it that someone else is doing more damage than you? Is it always that they're just better at pushing buttons in their sequence than you are, or pushing the buttons faster than you? I think so much of what I want to teach in this class is going to use this little bit of an introduction. The truth is no, that is not at all true. It really isn't. In fact, Cryptic and I spend very little time in the SFTA these days compared to what we used to do. Working on your rotation in the SFTA and learning to press buttons very quickly is important. It's important to get fluid and comfortable with your rotation, but to a point where you hit a threshold. I would say that the most important advice that I ever give people is to train hard enough so that you're not fighting with your rotation at the same time that you're fighting with the boss. What I don't want you to do is to be sitting in the SFTA forever, but I also don't want you to leave and go into raids while you're still having to stare at your skill bar for 99% of the fight. If you're staring at your bar the whole time and you're flustered with your rotation, having to make a bunch of decisions to go, oh crap, I just messed this up. Like if that's happening a lot to you, you're going to be fighting with that instead of fighting with the boss. But a lot of this training is going to be for people who have done enough DPS in raids or have learned how to do a rotation in the SFTA, and then they bring it out into raids and they're not top DPS and they're sort of wondering why. I think that is a really, really big divide that a lot of people have to go through when they're learning raids. Anybody can step into the SFTA and get comfortable enough, but going into actual raids and going, gosh, this other Reaper or whatever is just kicking my butt, or like, why is it when I first start the fight that someone else is so much higher in DPS than me every single time? Like, what is it? Like, I know my how to start the rotation. I know how to start my burst. Like, why is it being different? And there are so many of these little tips and tricks for every single class and for just DPS in general that other players or more experienced raiders are capitalizing on that you may not know. For example, I thought that was a great segue because Cryptic brought up one that is really not super well known on a Hollowsmith. And if you didn't wait that extra second, and Cryptic knew that there were going to be ads spawning a second later, and he pressed it a second later, he's going to get some little bit of damage increase on you. And that's a little class specific tip, but so many of the things that I really want to teach people come into play with every single class in the game. And I'm going to give you a great example right now, since we're in the I wanted to do this in the SFTA so that you guys could actually see what I'm doing, and I can sort of give an example. I watch a lot of DPS players do what I'm about to show you. Okay, we're at Sabbatha. Okay, just everybody imagine that we're at Sabbatha, or we're at Gorseval, or so many bosses where you have to like run in to the fight. And so like these are of course there's going to be very specific tips for very specific classes, but I just want to make sure that these broad strokes are covered because they're really important, and I watch these mistakes happen a lot. If you're on the bridge at Sabbatha, and okay, as a Reaper, maybe I should have played something that more people play as an example, but I'm on a Reaper. If you know a Reaper well enough, you know that you're basically going to drop a couple of wells, you're going to go into Shroud, and you're going to spin. But if you're starting on the bridge, and you run up, and you get put in combat like here, right? You're on the bridge, and as soon as you get to about here, you're put in combat. What's really important to know is that your numbers, your DPS numbers, are a ratio. That is taking place over the entire duration of the fight that you're in, and it does not begin like it does in the SFTA, when you first hit the boss. It begins the moment you are placed into combat, and you're placed in combat much before you actually get into melee range in a great many bosses. There's just an absolute ton of them. Or in a situation where you're waiting for a boss to come to you. It's the same exact thing. So if I know that I'm going to drop this well, hit these two buttons, and then go into Shroud, but I'm running across the bridge, and I'm like, okay, all right, and then I start my rotation here, you're going to have lost a huge amount of damage because you were put into combat back here, and as far as the game is concerned, you just did nothing for 4 or 5 seconds as you ran up to the boss. So you're losing huge damage. A lot of what it takes to be a good raider and do really good damage comes from your ability to not just do your rotation by rote, as you would in the SFTA. There are very few bosses that begin standing directly next to them, and you get to start it exactly how you would in the SFTA, right? Like Mersat Overseer is a good example of when you can. Most of the time, you can't. So augmenting your rotation to be able to do damage as you're running in is very important. You have to be able to capitalize on damage every moment of the raid. There's always a chance for you to be doing some kind of damage and taking the best advantage of your positioning, the distance, the part of your rotation that you're in, or the boss's ability to be targeted is a really big deal. So as I'm running in, instead of doing what I did, run up and then start my cast, if I run in and I see I have my I can have my well like this, so I can see sort of like sort of its max. You know, if I've gotten it by the time I'm in melee and I've been casting buttons every single moment of the time that I've been in combat, I'm going to kick your butt in DPS if all you were doing was sort of running in. And this is a really interesting example if you have a class that does not have its normal ramp up or its normal intro does not incorporate ranged skills. Then it changes. You're like, well, Maeric, what do I do about that? Like, my first skills that I'm supposed to use are melee. But that's when you need to not be so beholden to your rotation that you're practicing so much in the SFTA. There are skills that are ranged that maybe that are not part of your DPS rotation. Or if you have a travel skill, to travel very quickly into the fight, to get back to the fight so you can start doing that. Basically getting really good command of all of your skills, knowing them, not just the ones that are in your rotation, but the ones that could be used to augment a situation that isn't ideal, are really going to be making a big difference in setting you apart from somebody who is, just really strict on what they're doing watching a Snowcrow's benchmark video.
Yeah, so Maeric already kind of touched on it. I have 2 other points though, just general things. The second one is
Lyra.
going to be
Danny.
fairly short because
Lorenity, oh my gosh, what's up?
we will be getting into the bosses, but I need to say it before the third one. So my second one, know the bosses. We will be going into all the bosses. We will be going into what causes you to do less damage.
I'm going to do what I was talking about a second
ago. When you should and should not hold back your rotation, when there are split phases and you don't want to use your burst, when you can save skills, all that stuff. But knowing
so that would be
bosses,
what I would mean.
because they have modifiers just like we do, is extremely important. So I'll just give you an example everyone knows about, is Samurog. When Samurog's break bar is active, when she is pouncing on the fixated player, she's taking no damage. She's invulnerable. And it's really important to know how these things work because they work differently in a lot of cases. So Slothazor is a similar boss like that, where Sloth will take no damage when the break bar is active. However, it works a little bit differently. What happens with Slothazor is Slothazor cleanses all the conditions when it falls asleep. However, you can add new conditions while the break bar is active, but they will tick for no damage. So that's important to know. That is, for example, why power DPS is sometimes preferred on Slothazor, because the condies are cleansed. So things like that are really important to know for informing which builds you want to play, for informing, how you are working with your rotation, for what you're doing while you can't do damage, or what you're doing while you are doing more damage than you normally would. That's just a quick second thing. Like I said, we will get into all the bosses, so I'll do the third one now that Maeric already touched on, which is altering your rotation. So like I said, I don't play DPS too much in raids, but I did DPS as main in Fractals, and this was actually a huge thing for me because Fractal fights, a lot of them are longer or shorter depending, so the CM bosses and fractals, they have phases oftentimes, and if you are in a high DPS group, those phases go extremely quickly. So if you are using a raid or fractal build, they are often similar in a lot of cases, and you're doing your rotation like normal, you will discover in higher DPS groups on CM fractals that suddenly the boss is phased. And what did? You did like the first 25% of your rotation, which depending on what you're playing is normally like a somewhat slow ramp up. So it kind of is for Dragon Hunter, where you're like setting things up, and then you're doing your F1, and then you're like unleashing all that damage. And I found by the time that I was supposed to be unleashing my damage on Dragon Hunter, we had Weaver and a Condi Quick Brand and either like a Warrior or Soul Beast. They were already phasing it. So I knew I had to change what I was doing if I wanted to do respectable DPS, and also just to increase the overall party-wide DPS, so I changed things up, how I did things on my Dragon Hunter rotation, so that I was front-loading damage, and that caused two things. One, my own personal damage naturally went up, but two, we phased it a little bit faster. Also, from a fractal point of view, which people will recognize, I think things like this are just more obvious in fractals, which is why I'm using it as an example, because the phases are so much shorter than a lot of raid boss phases. Is you take a boss, second boss in the Nightmare CM fractal CX. So that was like a huge offender for, you know, needing to front load damage because the phases can be super short. He doesn't actually have that much health, but then if you've ever done that, you'll know you have to split up and you kill 4 ads. This is like, you know, any ad fight, like on VG, for instance. You have to split up, you have to kill the guardians separately. That lasts a little bit longer. There are 3 guardians. They do have more health and they have their little specific quirks, like the red guardian takes more condi damage. But in the fractal, you generally do it separately, even with 5 DPSers. Like, you don't have dedicated DPSers. You'd have an Alagricade, and then you'd have your Power Condi Quick Brand. So you're responsible for killing one on your own. So it is a real balancing act sometimes to alter your rotation in terms of, like, you had to go out there and you want to kill it fast because we at least wanted you know, a good clear time. You don't want a split phase to take up a lot of the fight. Like, it's the most boring part of a lot of fights. You want to actually fight the boss, yeah? So you want to get through that. So it's a balancing act of deciding what skills you can use, that it's not going to affect your burst or your rotation too much on the actual boss, because ultimately that is your goal. But you know, I didn't want to go out there and I didn't want to sit there like auto attacking that thing the entire time while, you know, other people, you know, used a couple more skills and then they get back to the center and then they're, you know, looking at their wristwatch trying to figure out how long it's going to take me to kill my ad. So that's a really good example of just figuring out on a split phase, figuring out the balance of what you can and should do. Some builds are going to be really friendly for split phases and you're going to be able to continue to glide through your rotation like nothing's wrong. This varies from boss to boss, obviously. Some splits are a lot shorter than others, so, like, you know, and going back to a Dragon Hunter example, like on VG split, like, you can continue using things pretty much as normal. On something that's like a lot shorter, depending on the boss, you might want to save some skills up so you have them ready. So that really does go back to just knowing the bosses as well, but split phases are always a really nice example. As well as, like Maeric was saying, on a fight like Sabatho, when you're getting into combat, you are running in, you can be doing damage the whole time. This depends on your squad as well. I'm sure some of you will have noticed some DPS on VG. VG in a lot of groups is pulled out to the edge of the arena. A lot of DPSers you will see will run in and they will start their rotation. And that's well and good. It's really there. It's a balancing act between, you know, distributing boons, and it's better if your squad knows what they are trying to accomplish, whether they are running in for VG and just the tank is standing out there, or what is happening with that. And sort of one more smaller things that you can't do quite as much in raids is precasting. You can precast, and that will often be a decent difference on some bosses. Maeric likes to, on his Reaper, use his staff and then put down all his staff symbols, and then the boss will walk through that. And that's
Allow me to demonstrate.
Allow him to demonstrate.
Everyone's been making fun of me for this, but I love it.
Yeah, so it's just a bit of free damage. Some other more popular precasts you may see are on fights like Slothazor and Mursad Overseer. You have damaging ground. So on a Chronomancer, you can equip a scepter or you can equip a sword, and you can go in there, you can block with it, and you don't need well, you can target something, but you can just create a clone, and then you have those clones, and the whole point of that is that you shatter as soon as you start the fight, and then you can start your rotation as normal, so it's just free damage you're getting. And if you're, you know, if you're a chrono build, everyone really does it, but if you're continuum splitting at the beginning of the fight, you can open with that, you have your free continuum split from the beginning, and then you can continue with your other shatters when you generate more clones. That's a pretty good example. Another one you will see is on a soul beast. You can merge with a bristleback pet, and then you use a skill. It gives you something called sharpened spines. It's a buff. Buffs are unlike boons on fights in that they persist. So you can merge with your bristleback, give yourself sharpened spines, and then if you start the encounter really soon after, you have that buff, and then you'll immediately be bleeding the target when you wouldn't have before. Also, I'm not sure if this works anymore. They might have nerfed it because Stokros definitely took advantage of it for a Marsat Overseer kill. I believe it still works. You can front load Ashes of the Just as well, and that has multiple stacks. One Wolf Pack is the same way, in that you can do it. You do have to be careful with some of these. They are effects, so you want to make sure, like, first of all, if you're not using whatever effect in your rotation, you want to be really sure you can swap to a different build really fast, or make whatever swap you need to. Like, do the effect before the fight starts, make the swap, and then actually start the fight. So for instance, a power soul beast, they don't take one wolf pack normally, or leader of the pack, the trait that allows you to share it. So you want to make sure you can change that real fast. If it's more swaps you have to make, that is perfectly cool. If you want to do that, you can do a build. You can take up a build template just for your precast if you happen to have it. If you don't, I'm very sorry. But you could do that, you can have it, and then you can bind hotkeys to your build templates, and then you can just use the hotkey before the fight starts. That's like, if you're changing multiple traits, then that's a whole lot easier than, you know, trying to click everything super fast after you do a precast. But those are my general tips, so I'm gonna let American Cryptic talk about those things now.
Yeah, it's all good advice. I think precasting is actually a really important thing that I'd like to talk about, so much more than just the kind of goofy stuff you see before, right? Like a thief can drop some traps and then switch the skill, or like dragon hunters can drop their traps, or like you saw me do right now, I can go onto my Reaper and set the stuff up ahead of time, right? On a staff, which a staff you'd never want as an actual weapon. So I go then into Greatsword, and of course he rode around my traps. What a big jerk. But yeah, so I'm now on Greatsword, the traps are still there, and it starts the fight. But that's such a small part of precasting. And every fight has a lot of opportunity to precast some skills because of phases. So you can sort of capitalize on it. And I want everyone to sort of get this mentality into their head, because it really is an interesting concept that will serve you really well. Every skill has a cast time, right? Even if it's a short one, and then a moment where it's going to do damage, or it's going to do its effect. Some of those skills are long, or some of the wait that you have to wait between the casting of the skill and the effect of damage that it's going to do is a pretty long delay. And precasting does not necessarily mean doing something memey just before the fight starts and then swapping again. It could be just trying to cut off the cast time or the delay of a skill prior to a boss becoming targetable. And this is really important. It's a good concept for you to learn. Oftentimes, if you see me play a Hollowsmith or a Scrapper in a raid, say a new phase begins, right? Like KC lands from the ceiling, or Veil Guardian becomes targetable again in the center, or what's his name, Samurog comes out of his alcove. There are opportunities where the boss is not targetable and then targetable. If you think to yourself, how best can I be effective? How much can I cut off that's unnecessary? Say the boss is going to become targetable in 3, 2, 1, now, and then you channel or start to cast a skill. You've lost a little bit of time, because that first portion of damageable exposure to the boss is spent with a cast time. Rather than the damage done itself. And these are little tiny things. When you see Cryptic or me or Knight or Bagu or Winter, the guys who like do a lot of DPS, who worry a lot about DPS in raids, it isn't always that we're just pushing buttons fast. It's that we are thinking about these things. It's best capitalizing on every scenario. For a good example is if I'm playing a Hollow Smith and I see a phase is about to begin, I can drop Big Ol' Bomb, which takes forever to blow up, as we all know. Right? I'm putting it on cooldown earlier so that it's going to come up again faster, and it's going to detonate just as the boss becomes available. Even Firebomb is the same exact thing. So many classes have some of these things that you can do ahead of time to try to get a cast in that doesn't necessarily have to be done outside of combat. Some of you guys have seen that I take Lich form on most raids. I don't actually take Flesh Golem unless the fight is in desperate need of CC. The precast that I do on this takes a long time. You see I'm doing it. They're still spawning. They just now start running in. They just start blowing up. These are things that you plan in advance, even in the middle of combat, to best capitalize on the damage window that you have. So trying to get the most damage in with the least waste is the name of the game. And that really is different for every class. I encourage you to look at your skills and start to bring that mentality with you. What can I shave off? What is unnecessary? What can I get started ahead of time? You know, what can I, like the boss is about to phase. Should I skip ahead to a skill, even though it's not part of my rotation? Right? So boss knowledge. When a boss becomes targetable, when it becomes untargetable, when a phase begins, when a phase ends. These are really important things to be able to keep a DPS rotation effective. And so a lot of that comes from exposure. I tell people in the stream, and we talk about this all the time, that so much of getting better at raids isn't just practicing your skills in the SFTA, but getting to know raids so well to really pay attention to mechanics. This is why I actually prefer to get a raider who's beginning to raid. I prefer you to learn on a DPS, but I also prefer you to learn on one that does not have an overly complicated rotation. I would rather you stay alive, survive, do less damage, and look around the arena. Get to see what mechanics look like, get to see what phases look like when they happen, right? The animations of skills so that you can know how to not interrupt a skill when it's really important. So these kinds of things probably play a bigger role than you think. And it's really important. I know a lot of raiders, we raid like a ton every week, and there are still people that have not crossed this very particular threshold where a lot of raiders go into raids sort of panically reacting to mechanics as opposed to calmly anticipating them. Like if I know that the fight is about to phase, not only are you going to stop getting surprised by the sand wall at Adina and die because you didn't really look to see that we're about to hit the phase percentage, right? Like once you kind of pick your head up, look around, see how to best reorganize what you're doing to take advantage, you will be more successful, and you'll find that there's a lot more fun in this. I talk to a lot of raiders, or a lot of aspiring raiders, or Guild Wars 2 casual players who aren't as interested in raiding because they're like, well, you know, I'm just going to learn this rotation with these skills that I don't get to pick, and it's just like a cookie cutter thing, and you just have to do it, you know, over and over again and never screw up. That couldn't be farther from the truth, because it's those people that are doing that are actually failing to top the DPS meters in actual raids. Sort of making changes, making decisions. I actually bring different skills than, if you go to Snowcrows right now, you're going to see that my build differs than Snowcrows does. And I make changes based on the fight or based on the group that I'm in. I make changes in my rotation based on the phase, based on the overall DPS that I have in the group. Phoenix was talking about earlier that can affect the decision about what class you want to bring to a raid. And that's very true. But it can also change the way that you play. So trying to keep that in mind, trying to just keep this, how best to be effective, how little waste to do, and to practice that on your build. I can tell you right now, and I was talking about this some yesterday on the stream as I was trying to narrate some of it as I was doing each individual boss, but every individual boss, every phase within that boss, I'm not just making stuff up and doing random things. I have played my class enough on that boss to know skill by skill, thing by thing that I'm going to do the moment that Rigum is at 5% HP to the moment that Samurag finally comes out of the alcove and has reached the tank. And starts just doing random damage. So the being able to do damage while she's in the alcove and I can't reach her naturally is one thing. The damage on the move as she's going until she reaches her stopping point, and the big burst that I get in trying to do as much damage as possible before the CC phase. I know them skill by skill, class by class, and this is where all of this work comes in. It is not your ability to push buttons super fast in the SFTA. That is not the only thing that counts in raids. So if you think to yourself like, oh, I'll never be able to do this, it isn't true. There are so many other ways to use your mind and to anticipate and to plan that are going to actually net better reactions or better results for you. And each different class has different things. That's actually what keeps me raiding. Trying new classes all the time in raid environments is sort of seeing how best I can tweak the tools that I'm given to each individual little phase and mechanic.
Yeah, to expand on some things, things I thought of, some newer raiders might not know this, but a really good example of what Merrick was saying is the 10% phase at Doom. So you have Doom, and what you have to do is you have to make him drop down. He's not even targetable before you channel the seals during that phase. You have to run out, you have to interact with some things, and then everyone has to run back in. There are 3 players normally in a 10-man raid, unless people are dead, that will be standing in that bubble the whole time just waiting for him to drop. If you're in that situation, great. Like, that's a really good time to precast. Otherwise, though, you can be doing things when you're running back as precasting. And a really good thing to remember about that phase on Doom is that Doom, you have 20 seconds. It's a 20-second burst window, so obviously know where your burst is. If you need to front load it, feel free. Some rotations are obviously a lot longer than others, so keep that in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of people would be playing Condi classes at Doom. It's a very Condi-oriented fight in a lot of ways. The thing is, well, yeah, sure, P chrono, that's every fight though. But yeah, so one thing to keep in mind is that Doom rises up into the ceiling if you do not finish him off in one burn, which is the case for many groups. Conditions continue to tick, even though you can't target him anymore, even though you can't use your skills. The conditions you put on him beforehand, they continue to tick. It's so important to remember that. It can help you, one, if you keep that in mind, just load conditions onto him. It might mean the difference between 1 burn phase and 2, or 2 burn phases and 3 on that boss. If you keep those conditions going, if you just pile them on as much as you can in the last 5-second window, they continue to tick. It's great. Yeah, so that's one example, and another kind of weird example of precasting I wanted to add as well is precasting crowd control. People don't really think of this. They think, and it's important to realize that the bar must be active. It must be blue before your crowd control is actively counting. So you don't want to be using your heavy CC when it's not there. But a lot of crowd control skills have a kind of dial-up time, or they last for a while. So on an Alacrigade or a Condi Renegade who is playing Kala, you have Dark Razor's Daring. You might want to use this to CC. Dark Razor's Daring, it's a kitty, and it just sits there and it claws at the air, and it lasts for a while. So on a fight where you know the CC is coming, you can put that down a second before if you think it would impact the rest of your rotation less, or anything like that. It's a really good idea to do this on something like Samurag. If you are on a build and you are getting fixated and you know that 10% is coming, you can do this. You can put your Dark Razor staring down on your Alac. You get fixate accidentally a lot on Alac on that fight because you're Saf 5. but you can put that Dark Razor staring down, and it will help CC yourself, and it will just make the phase take less time. If you are on a chrono, you can use Gravity Well. They are pretty consistently fixates on there. If you are a DPS player and you are accidentally fixated, say you're on a Hollow Smith, you drop your big old bomb, and then you get fixated right after your bomb goes off after that, and you are helping to CC yourself out of that. So that's a kind of weird instance of precasting, but it can definitely happen sometimes.
Also, be careful about dropping a big old bomb and then becoming a slubling.
Yeah, that's there's
You'll big
there's
old
some
bomb your
bad,
friends.
there's some bad precasting that can happen on Slothazor if you're about to become a slubling, but that's a different situation.
Something I'll add is that I think Merrick touched on this a little bit earlier, but something that I noticed a lot of, I wouldn't say newer raiders, but people that perhaps haven't spent enough time DPSing, is that when a boss will phase, or when a boss will go invulnerable, or any of one of those things, they will just like stop everything and focus on whatever the mechanic or whatever they're supposed to be doing, which is partially the right thing to do. But when you're really trying to get good numbers, you always want to be focusing on what can I do to improve my DPS. And moments when the boss is invulnerable is not a moment where your DPS is where you can't do things to improve your DPS. Simple things like positioning and stuff are a part of it, but again, knowing your build, like on Hollow, as long as the boss isn't truly invulnerable, as long as you're getting like zeros, or there's an ad nearby maybe that you can throw grenades at, you can start stacking ferocity and keep those ferocity stacks at 10, so when you go back into your rotation, you're doing more damage. And same thing, if you're playing again a Hollow, I play a lot of Hollow, or a Renegade, you can manage your heat or your my mind just went blank. What's the Renegade thing? Yeah, you can manage your different energy types, your different mechanics to make sure that you're getting right at the optimal point to start your rotation again. And all those things are really important to focus on. Samurog as an example. Every time Samurog goes in CC, drop all your CC. Now you've done your part while the CC is being finished. Go into grenade or switch weapons and let your energy start building back up, and be ready to go. Don't just stand there waiting for the boss to become vulnerable again.
Getting your HP back up if you can help it as a power build. Trying to get your make sure that you've got Scholar uptime ready to go for as soon as you're starting to do DPS again. You guys see me play a lot of Reaper, spending time getting your life force back. I cannot say this enough. I see Reaper sitting at like 50% HP or life force and doing nothing. In situations like, a good example, Cryptic was talking about if a boss is not completely invulnerable, your skills will still work. And some of those situations would surprise you. For example, in Keep Construct, when you're doing the orb collecting phase. As soon as he's done with the orb collection phase, he's going to be targetable again, and you're going to have an opportunity to do a bunch of damage. Do not undersell how much effect the non-burn phases are going to have on your DPS. And a lot of times I will end up in the orb catching phase, because that comes right after a DPS phase, with very little life force. But you can spend the entire time while you're spinning around the boss, right? This is Keep Construct. I'm spinning around the boss, collecting orbs, pressing Axe 2, auto-attacking in Greatsword, pressing Greatsword 3. These get your life force back. You can sit there just chucking grenades, which you absolutely should be doing while you're catching your things, because that's putting stacks of this. This is what Cryptic was talking about, explosive temper, which increases... this is the big change that happened to Hollows a while ago that really gave them a giant buff, was the Explosions rework. Explosions grant stacking ferocity when they hit, which means that you want to keep that stack at 10. Do you see how fast it goes down? Right, it goes up really quickly, but if you're waiting for a DPS phase and you stop and you're just collecting orbs and you're doing nothing, eventually those stacks are going to go away. You're going to start a phase with nothing, and you're going to have to start all over again. These are little things that every build's got, little things between burn phases that can always be done to increase the damage for when the burn phase starts again. And remember, if I'm just sitting here waiting for KC to land at the beginning, and the druid says, okay, I'm pushing the orb out now, and I'm watching him, why not spend the time to drop this? ahead of time. Just look, it just now blew up, right? So, like, it takes so long. Drop this and then drop this. Boom, that goes off. Boom, that goes off. You've got this time to throw them ahead of time. Why not the moment that he lands, you're on skill 3 instead of starting skill 1? You know what I'm saying? That is a huge difference. That sort of mentality of bet, and Cryptic nailed it. Like, best capitalizing on time that you might think is useless, because it isn't. It is never useless. There's always something, regardless of your build, that you can keep in mind or get ready for or do ahead of time that's actually going to make a big difference. Also, Loranity asked earlier a really good question, which was about auto attack chains. This is something that I think is like the final tier of somebody at the portion of their DPS journey that they're working in the SFTA. Is a lot of times no one who's learning to DPS respects auto attack chains. Not every build is going to have this apply to them. Oddly enough, I'm on one that doesn't, right? I think any Hollowsmith or engineer that brings a bomb kit tends to replace any auto attacks with bomb dropping, which of course does not have an auto attack chain. But if your class does have an auto attack chain, learning to recognize what that looks like is going to make or break your DPS rotation. Classes like Power Chrono. If you look at the overall damage of Mind Spike, I think is what it's called, the final attack in the auto attack chain of Sword as a Chrono, turns out to be the biggest contributor of damage in your entire rotation. Period. It's going to blow your mind if you go and look. You must respect the auto attack chain, because if you don't, you will lose a gargantuan amount of damage. Condi Firebrand, another one. Scourge, another one. You're going to just be basically counting auto attack chains and trying to sandwich skills between those chains. Unfortunately, not all chains are created equal. Sometimes it is not super easy to be able to count them. If you're on an Asura, it might have a different auto attack chain animation than it would on a human. You're also going to be smaller. I've had some classes, I think it was Mirage. Mirage was huge. Auto attack chain in Mirage, very important. The auto attack chain finisher on Asura was actually easier to see because it did like a big spin or something. But if you're on a Reaper, the third attack on that great sword is so slow, and the sword becomes frosty and it comes down with a very distinctive sound. It really is easy. But some classes are going to be harder. The thing that I encourage you to do is, especially if you're raiding and you're not really good at staring at your character, right? Cryptic and I are stacking together like good little DPSers, and maybe it's not easy for me to see my character well enough to count my auto attack chains. But this bar down here is going to help give that away sometimes. So if you watch the bar, the final attack on an auto attack chain is often slower than the previous two, and it can make a really big difference. So if you're, what I encourage you to do is to go into the SFTA and just auto attack. Get used to what your chain looks like, and more importantly, get used to the speed of the bars as they're casting. Because if you can look down and go, I don't know where I am in my auto attack chain, but then you see that slow one hit, bam, you know where you're at again, and you can start counting again. You can count if you want to, you can count if you're comfortable, but otherwise, visual cues or checking on the bar makes a really big difference. That can actually increase your damage a large amount. And sometimes, like, canceling that in a way that is not good can be really detrimental. Hollowsmith Photon Forge is one. Reaper Shroud is another. There's ones where it's not even just your regular auto attack, right? It's like your stance auto attack. This is the auto attack in your stance, Photon Forge or Shroud or whatever, and that can be even more impactful. So Loranity is definitely right. That is like a later in the stage of you working on your rotation moment, but once you get to that and you start to respect it, you'll start to recognize a rhythm of that particular class, that you know when to fit skills in between these very distinctive pockets of your auto attack chain. The only time that's going to get really frustrating is if you have a drop in quickness. Drop in quickness is going to make that really, really weird, and that's going to be tough for anyone.
I do also want to say that for auto attack chains, for the last skill in the chain, there is sometimes an audio cue as well. If you like having that up, it can sometimes be definitely difficult to hear during a raid boss when if you have music and other audio cues and a lot of stuff going on. But if you turn up effects, sometimes you can hear, for instance, Merrick mentioned Scourge, so like your Scepter auto attack chain. It's like it's a pretty similar animation, but on the third one, there's a very distinctive sound that your Scepter makes. So if you, just go into the Golem and like listen to that, then, you might be able to pick it out more easily in a raid.
Very true. Go ahead.
Holosmith Forge does a double hit for the sound for the Forge autos, if anybody's wondering. So it's the exact same sound as the normal Forge auto, but on the third one you can hear it hit twice, and the animation is like a world. There's usually a tell for every auto. I can't think of one that doesn't have some kind of tell. If it's not an animation or a sound, it will be the icon will change, will be distinct enough.
So in mine, you can see there's a distinctive gap between the first two and the third. So attack, and then delay, attack. I would say the cast time is probably the same, but there's a distinctive delay between the second and the third attack. So these are going to be very different based on whatever class you happen to be playing. There's really is no way to do this and have the advice be the same for everything. It really is going to be you taking it into the SFTA and just kind of getting that rhythm down, learning what cues are easiest for you to see. I encourage you to try to find one that isn't just visual, because sometimes that's going to be really hard if staring at your character is tough. This game is based entirely around stacking. It can make life really, really difficult if you're trying to look for visual cues.
Something else I wanted to touch on, I think somebody had a kind of a question about that in the chat as well, is like picking a class for raids. First, obviously this isn't a tutorial for getting into raids, but for like DPSing, definitely would suggest starting off just picking one or two classes that you enjoy and that you're comfortable learning on and having fun with, because it's a long road. So you don't want to try to master P Chrono and then you hate playing P Chrono. that would be the most important thing is to have fun. So as long as you're having fun, you can get through the grind to the end. But once you do get to the end, it really depends a lot on the groups you're running with and how much DPS they're doing. It's really funny, and Maeric will attest to this, it's funny how a really strong class and a class that you're really comfortable and really good on becomes absolutely useless when DPS reaches a certain point. And there are all kinds of examples. My Hollow, I play ECSU Hollow, it starts to fall off if you're in a class or in a raid where there's really high burst phases. ECSU does not have the highest burst phase of a lot of power ones. It's not the lowest, but there are definitely plenty of classes that burst way higher. So if you're getting
even other Holosmiths.
Yeah, even other Holosmiths. So KC is one I like to point out. Holosmith does pretty good there, but there are plenty of other classes that once the DPS starts to get up there and people are pulling crazy numbers, your ECSU starts to fall off and you start looking at, if you're really trying to compete on the numbers and you don't want to be, 5th or 6th or whatever on the DPS chart, you start having to look at other classes too. Soul Beast is a good one, or PBM Hollow. Other classes that can really pull Chrono, really pull good burst.
DH.
Yeah, DH. So yeah, that's kind of something you can focus on. Once you are consistently, when you're consistently pulling good numbers in whatever groups you're running, and okay, I'm one of the 1 or 2 top DPSers in this group, one top 3 in this one, number 1 in this one, you can gauge the damage they're doing, and that can kind of help you pick which classes not only fit the comps and the strategies you're doing, but also the damage overall. Because small little things in strategy or damage can affect greatly the end number that you get. Firebrand on Adina is another one. If the damage is too high, Firebrand goes from being one of the top classes to being last in DPS.
Cryptic has seen it. My Firebrand, then I play a very strong Firebrand. Oftentimes in a lot of groups that we do, I'm top DPS or second, and it happens often. But we've ended up in groups with very strong DPS, and I'm all of a sudden Very sad. At the bottom. Like Connie Firebrand, as far as the Connie build goes, ramps up fairly quickly. But, in terms of competing with a high actual burst class, such as a bunch of very strong hollows or DHs or Solvies, etc., it's really not going to do well. So this is a really important factor about raids that everyone should know. Again, outside of weird fights like Mersat Overseer, which is a very bizarre environment, much akin to doing a kitty golem like I'm doing in the SFTA, most fights in the game are phased. And every phase, or the vast majority of phases in the game, come from a certain percentage of DPS. And so that means that you've got a window in which to perform your damage in and try to hit the highest peak of your damage in that window. I know this can feel a little tedious, but it gets really exciting when you start to really know your class best, how best to get your DPS burst in there, and then when you fully understand it and you start to play a few more builds, you can kind of make those determinations in this window based on the boss that I'm fighting and based on the group that I'm in. How much time do I have to do damage and what build would be best to do so with? And it really changes drastically. I'm telling you, like Firebrand on Adina is a phenomenal example, because I can go from one group being absolutely dominant top DPS because the window of damage in those burn phases is long enough for me to ramp up like I'd like to. But it could be very short and I could end up having no opportunity to do that damage. So any kind of power build, and every build in the game has a bit of a curve. It has an arc. And if you go into arc DPS, and I encourage you to do this, and look at logs at like DPS report, right? You see the logs that we link. Look at the graph. There are patterns with every class. You can see where you burst, how fast you ramp up, and then usually there's a spike that kind of goes down or it starts to even out. Soul Beast is comical. It's actually hilarious to watch. The spike is the highest in the game. It goes so high, so fast, and then it falls off drastically. I mean, devastatingly low right after that. And so, like, yes, over the course of its benchmark in a 1 minute and 20 second golem, or however long it takes them to kill it, they end up at a decent benchmark, right? 37k or whatever it happens to be. But your goal as a Soul Beast is to eliminate the waste, right? It's exactly what I was talking about before. Get rid of all of the cast times and the ramp up before a fight begins or before a phase begins. But then also, you'd love that burn phase to end and cut off everyone's damage at the exact same time that your DPS is about to start fading away, right? And that is a big thing. Like Reaper, Hollow, DH, Soul Beast. A lot of the power builds, in fact, most power builds, there are a few notable weirdo exceptions that kind of behave more like Condis, where they're very consistent. But most power builds spike up and then spike way down and they're crap, and then they spike really high again and then they're way down and it's crap. But over the period of a fight, it is ratioed, and you are given an average. Right? You're given your mean damage, which is what your DPS is. So, if you can try to capitalize so that the phase ends at your high point and then everyone has to stop, right? Where your DPS would have dropped off painfully and the Condi Weaver would have continued steadily, you get to have introduced your giant spike, which is way above a Condi class, and then have it end before that drop off and the Condi class would have suffered more. So there's just so many little things that go into I don't want to say min-max, but more like making effective, like focusing on the efficacy of your playstyle, of the build you choose, how to capitalize on phases. And this is what I mean by the actual boss knowledge really coming into play. Knowing how long a boss phase is going to be, knowing when that phase is going to end. I know that the boss is going to phase at 75% at Sabir, right, or whatever. So like I'm watching it, I'm paying attention. I know that it's coming, and you can make determinations based on that. So don't just sit here and DPS and then fling yourself at the boss every week. Go and read a guide. I'm Adina. Thank you, Kuro. I was thinking, I thought I said the wrong one a second ago. 75%, which is the weird one. But you know, make sure you go and learn these little things. Make sure you pick your eyes up off of your skill bar and glance at the boss's HP so that you can start to make those decisions. A lot of the discussion earlier was about what class. Somebody asked, like, what class do I bring to raids? There's a lot of every different raider out there is going to have a different opinion about what you should bring to raids. But I have a few criteria that I really like. And I won't even say the class, okay? You all know what it is, but I'm not going to say it. But my criteria is I'd like you to have the ability to survive the whole fight. So I don't want you to play something that is very dangerous to play. If you're playing a like a Weaver and you're learning raids, chances are you're going to get hit by mechanics. See, Knight said Weaver. You're going to get hit by mechanics. You have 11k HP. You have a lot of very few mitigative skills to manage incoming damage, and you don't know where they are at first, because when you first go into raids, you know a cursory version of your DPS rotation, and that's pretty much it. So if you die early, or you're spending half the fight on the floor, you're not getting exposure to raid mechanics. It's really not good. So I'd like you to be able to survive. Second, I would like you to be able to contribute to the raid in some way, shape, or form without having to be obsessed with your rotation. If you have an overly complicated rotation, I'm sorry to pick on Weaver, but it's the best example again. Weaver is a very high APM, very complicated rotation. If you're coming in on something like that, I promise you're going to be fighting with your rotation as much as you're fighting with the boss, which means you're not looking at your feet. You're not seeing the teleport circle that you're standing in. You're not looking at the Seeker walking up behind you. You're not seeing Ender's Echo walking up to kidnap you. I don't know why Doom CM would be the first raid you ever did. That would be weird, but you know, whatever. There's so many mechanics that you're not seeing because you're staring at your bar. So a streamlined rotation, or at least one that isn't super complicated, is very important. And then your ability to contribute to CC is also really a factor in a lot of raids, especially in some of the more intro training raids. Like CC is definitely something that you need to know how to do. And so like learning what those skills are in your rotation, and preferably having at least one or two that are not part of your rotation, because knowing when to hold a skill for a CC bar that is coming up that you don't know is coming is challenging, and intro raiders are not quite ready for it. So your commander yells CC and you go, oh yeah, that's big ol' bomb, and you go, crap, I already used big ol' bomb. You know, like it's on cooldown, and I used it just before, and I'm not ready. So on demand CC, also very helpful. So whatever you can get exposure to raids in, repeated exposure to raids in, so that you can see the mechanics, learn the phases. I want you to be able to look up at the HP of the boss and see that it is coming to a phase and make a decision based on that, right? Sabbatha is going to leave the platform at certain percentages. And then when she comes back at certain percentages. These are predictable things that you can know ahead of time and make decisions based on. But I watch a lot of raiders do a huge amount of raiding for years, you know, without really taking the time to look up those little details. And they're always sort of struggling with the same things. Adina is actually a really good example. How often do you see people pushing to DPS? They don't know that they shouldn't spread, right? They don't know that they should just stay in for that last percentage to phase it, or that's not the factor. And when we're comfortable just sitting there DPSing, but they don't know that it's about to phase and the flame wall is about to start, and they're right inside the hitbox when the flame wall starts, and they don't notice and they die. So unless there's a raid call being made, okay, 3, 2, 1, everybody back out, they are not only making incorrect DPS decisions, but they're going to be reliant on somebody else stopping them from dying. And if that raid call isn't made, their life could be much harder. So look up a guide, ask questions. There's a lot of people out there that are super happy to answer. But again, take the time to look around. Pry your eyes off of your skill bar, because even though it looks like you're going to do worse damage in that particular fight, in that particular run, that pull that you're doing, the knowledge that you're going to gain, the comfort that you gain with mechanics in each individual raid translates to much higher DPS later on. That's the actual biggest increase that you can make.
Yeah, so go ahead. Oh, it's just a small kind of thing. Merrick is definitely kind of targeting Reaper there as far as all his tips go, and that is it's a really good beginner class. It's
I didn't
super
say it.
tanky.
I didn't say it. I said nothing.
But I do want to say, like, if you haven't chosen Reaper, if you've chosen a Weaver, if you've chosen a Power Dragon Hunter who similarly
Doc,
you wear
what's
heavy
up,
armor
dude?
but you still have that 11k HP, if you've chosen something else and you really do like it and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm spending my time on the floor, I don't know what to do.
Also,
I'm gonna
Hemis,
tell
thank you
that
for the
a lot
follow,
of
dude.
classes, you can do things to increase your survivability so much. Snow Crows, if you go to their website, if you look at their class guides, you can read for every boss and they will give you tips, and it's not always increasing your DPS, it's about surviving. And surviving when you are a beginner in raids is the biggest DPS increase there is. You are not doing damage when you are on the floor, you are not doing damage when you are dead. Throwing, one of my primary DPS classes out there, Dragon Hunter. It is squishy. You have 11k HP. You could die very fast. But your heal skill that you use by default, Litany of Wrath, it is one of the most powerful healing skills in the game. You can take advantage of it in so many situations. You have your F1, F2, F3. You use your F1 for damage. Your F2, it cleanses Condi. Some people I see don't even know that. You also leap away. You can get away from something. You can jump over something. And it also heals you. It is a triple threat sort of thing for survivability. Your F3, it gives everyone else Aegis, which is a big bonus of it, but it's blocking so many different attacks. So like these things that are not in your rotation, if you've chosen a class and you really like it and you're like, oh crap, I realize, it's super difficult for a beginner like me to learn it, I want to say there are things you can do to augment and things you can look into to make your life easier earlier on.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is also like not being afraid to change your skills. Merrick talked a bit about this earlier, but like changing your skills not only can make you like a little more survivable in certain situations, but can also just be a DPS increase or make dealing with certain mechanics simpler. Photon Wall on Hollow is a big one I like to swap to. On like Kadim, for example, you can block every single wave with the Photon Wall that Kadim does when you're in his burn phase. That saves you from having to dodge, and if you don't have to dodge, not only is that saves you from losing some DPS, but then you're doing the Photon Wall skill, which is damage you're getting in during that moment. And there are plenty of things like that. Another thing is we talked about like not altering your rotation, or we talked about altering your rotation like during fights, like if a boss goes into a phase or it's like you're ranged for whatever reason and not stopping your DPS. But the same goes true at the end of a fight. Like right at the end, I see so many people continuing to do their rotation as normal and not, you should know what your big damage skills are. So Hollow here, Forge 4, Forge 3 is a nice one, Blade Burst, Prime Light Beam. Those are big damage skills, all the big ones. If any of those are off cooldown and the boss is at 2-3%, I am stopping my rotation and doing all of those. I am going to make sure I get those off right before the boss dies, because that's going to be 500 DPS more that I could have gotten, as opposed to just let me continue doing my sword auto attack rotation.
Yeah, use all the rest of your shatters. Use all of them. Use the last charge of whatever mantra you've got, right? You usually have to save that last charge, Firebrand, Chrono, whatever. You spit them out. If you know that the fight is about to end, and you'll see this actually play out in the Snow Crow's benchmark videos. Everyone is, of course, doing that, taking advantage of the last moment of the fight and trying to either take a shortcut to end at the portion of your rotation that does the highest amount of damage, or, spill the beans, man. Use whatever rest you've got. Just click everything that is big and waste it, because it's not going to matter. The fight's about to end. That's really good advice. I see a lot of people not do that, and that's a huge factor. For example, P-Chrono uses the mantra, right? The mantra, unlike Firebrand, doesn't even have a recast. There's no cooldown after you use the last charge of the mantra. Yeah, you have to recharge the mantra. It takes time to cast, so you're not going to want to do it in the middle of a fight. But if you're doing Heck, even Samurag, where every 10% you've got this thing. Use the last charge just before it becomes invincible, then spend some of the time during the CC bar to recharge it. If you're going down below in Deimos, use the last charge just before you go down. Why not? You could charge it up again while you've got some downtime, or while you're ranged. If you know a boss is going to become untargetable for X amount of time, spend that time and invest it in that little bit of extra damage.
So we're going to we're kind of winding down now. I just want to say that I know Merrick has a raid to go to in about half an hour. I think GW2. But one thing, so we've kind of brushed up against changing your skills, which is a very interesting thing on a DPSer. Supports do this a ton. If you play a support, you know that on every boss you're changing your traits, you're changing your skills. You don't do this as much on a DPS, but I think some DPSers are afraid to do it because how do I alter my rotation with this skill? And if my rotation has this, and if I change it, then I don't have it anymore, and what do? But don't be afraid to do that. Just and we will talk about this on Thursday when we go into the bosses, because that's really where changing your skills is going to matter on a boss by boss basis. But yeah, don't be afraid to do it. Just know, particularly if you're trading something in, what to trade for. So one sort of sin I've seen before is if you're trading something on a Dragon Hunter, you want to take a more utility oriented skill, because Guardian has a lot of those. You trade your swords, which is well and fine, that's what you trade, but then you will see I've seen people go to Conditioned Firebrand, and you also bring swords on a Condi Firebrand, but you bring a trait to augment those swords. It gives you an extra charge on them and increases the burning or something like that. But people will say, oh, on my Dragon Hunter, I traded my sword utility, so I'm going to trade my sword utility on my Condi Firebrand. That makes sense. No, on your Condi Firebrand, what you want to trade is actually your Signet.
Roka.
So it
Sleep is for the weak.
for every build and everything like that, and there's a lot of little nuance in it. It's a lot of info base. Like I said, we'll go into it more on Thursday. But don't be overwhelmed, and don't be afraid to try out new things when you're starting.
Yeah, exposure. Keep putting yourself in the raids. Keep seeing them. Do them often. Try those different things. Just keep trying them. Try something new. Try to be working on something every fight that you're doing, right? If you're in a pug and it's not going well, you're beating your head against the same boss over and over again, or you're doing a training raid with your friends and it's slow going. That's perfect time to start really experimenting with different skills or different skill usages, different orders, different precasts, different intros that really make a huge difference. So you can actually get that practice in.
One more thing that I don't know if we touched on enough is another thing that I see a lot of times is people seeing, and this training is also called greeting response, or this masterclass is also called greeting responsibly. But another thing that I see a lot of people doing is that they think greeting means skipping mechanics or doing mechanics badly. And it's definitely never the case for doing mechanics badly. You should never be doing that. But it's not always about skipping mechanics. A lot of times getting good DPS and greeting properly is about being really good at that mechanic. So two examples would be one, like on KC, when you're greeting there right after the orb phase, when he's doing that danger donut, knowing exactly the range where you're within damage ability for your melee attacks, for your abilities on KC, and then also knowing when he's going to do that leap away and fixate on someone, leaving so you can get to the statue so that he won't land in no man's land, is all part of, because that means you're just tanking. If you fail at that, it means you're tanking the fight for everybody, and if you do it wrong, it means you're tanking your own DPS because you're probably dead underneath KC because you got killed by the danger donut. So when you see someone greeting there and doing that, and they're doing it successfully, it's not them being bad at a mechanic or skipping a mechanic. That's them they were able to do that because they got really good at that mechanic. So it's important to continue to keep practicing that. And then another thing would be, some mechanics that you can't get around, like Samurag's CC. and I'm not the CC person to talk to, but getting more CC means that you will be able to do more damage quicker, right? Your damage is you're gonna spend less time seeing that number tick down in our DPS. So as long as you're not giving up so much damage for that CC that it's kind of a counterbalance. As long as you find the right balance there to where your group is able to do the CC, and then the faster you can do it, the better your damage is. That's a nice thing to continue to work on a balance there, and to also continue to see which one of your skills are going to be best suited for providing that CC, but also how their cooldowns relate to when the CC comes up. So if you can continue to fine tune that balance with yourself and the group, you're going to see small improvements in not only your numbers individually, but your group's numbers overall. You'll see those log numbers go up and up, and it's not because you're doing more damage, it's because you're spending less time with an invulnerable boss.
Yeah, like Cryptic said, the theme of this is really greeting responsibly, and when we go through the bosses, we will emphasize one, mechanics. So you're on VG. A lot of people know VG. You're on a Power Soul Beast.
What's
It's
up,
got a very
dude?
long animation lock in the form of that Axe 5, and that's a very nice chunk of DPS there. But oh, what's this? You notice a teleport under your feet, but you're sitting there thinking, oh, I gotta finish this Axe 5, I gotta finish it. And you continue doing it, and what happens? You get teleported because you absolutely refuse to end it. I understand why. I do. I know, it's huge DPS. You didn't want to lose it, but then you got teleported, and now you're across the arena, and now you're doing no DPS, and you're running back, and everyone's else numbers.
Now you have agony.
Going.
Now you're down in the outside. Now we have to go and res you. Now everything falls apart.
On Merrick's side, I think that's more. But yes, yeah. So don't do it at the cost. Yes, you want to do your rotation, you want to perform it well, but if it means you get hit by a mechanic and your DPS tanks, that's not greeting responsibly. That's greeting poorly, and your DPS will definitely go down. There are so many examples on many different bosses, and CC. It's another big thing. It's not only do your CC part and then you can auto attack. Yes, that's definitely true, but making sure you are doing your part, because on some bosses like Samurog, you're doing no damage the entire time that break bar is up. I don't know, do you think your DPS is going up on a DPS cut? No, it's not. You're just auto attacking. It's not even taking damage from your auto attacks. You're not
even applying condis on Samurog, right? So it's just utterly pointless.
So if you're sitting there and you're like, this CC skill is not in my rotation, or this CC skill takes up a valuable resource that I have to use for other skills, well, guess what? If, there's a huge difference between that CC phase lasting 4 seconds and it lasting up to 11 or 12 seconds, as you see in some groups. Because it's another 6 seconds when you could have been doing DPS, but you weren't, because you refused to use that skill for some reason, something like that. So, please take these things into consideration. It is not always about greeting. It's not always about doing your rotation perfectly. There's a lot more involved that is not so selfish and is more about just, survival and self-preservation and helping out your group to help out yourself.
Cryptic is right here co-leading this. I think it's really inappropriate for you to call him out so much. It's really, it's a bummer. It's a bummer, Cryptic.
That's fair.
Yeah, so I can't wait. I want everyone to know that this is actually a 2-part event that we're going to be doing. So tonight is the first night. We wanted to just sort of go over the broad strokes, what DPS looks like, how it is not just doing your rotation in the SFTA. Please don't let me deter you from that. Working on your rotation on the golems, very important. Being able to get your rotation down to a point where you're very comfortable with it, can do it on the move, be able to get back on track if a mechanic causes you to have to stop midway, make it so that you don't really have to be staring at your bar the entire time to be able to perform it. These are the things that are really good, not can I get 100% of the Snowcrow's benchmark. That's not really the rest. The rest of it really kind of comes in with everything else that we've talked about tonight. There's so much of it, obviously. The next time that we do this, we're going to sort of go into the detail of each individual boss, is my hope that we can make it through that. Sort of like little tips and tricks for each individual boss, how best to plan or apply these tips and tricks that we've given tonight in an actual raid environment. So I'm gonna, if I can manage it by then, I'm gonna try to get some video of like actual raid encounter that I can pull up, show you, maybe go over a VOD, so we can pinpoint some interesting things that are being done, so you can apply some of these concepts to actual raid bosses in specific. There's so many of them. I mean, I could go on forever and ever. If you guys have any extra questions outside of this, I know that Phoenix, Cryptic, and I are all very happy to field any of those questions. So if you have any specific boss questions or specific class questions, please feel free to field them to us. We will, of course, pass them along to someone who can answer them if we cannot. I linked my Discord earlier. Please feel free to hop in there and ask questions day or night. There's always somebody to respond to that. I wanted to show a good example, actually, of the kind of things that I mean, because I was thinking about this when it was being talked about a moment ago. I went onto my Holosmiths just so I could show it really quickly. You know, when we were talking about getting stacks up for Explosive Temper, right? You know, in Sabir, when you're just doing damage to the boss and all of a sudden everyone has to do corners, we have to run to the corner. What I see a lot is that people just kind of run away to the corner, get to the corner, stop, stare at the boss, and then run back into the boss and start doing things. But every mechanic in the game, boss by boss, I'd like to go over as much as we can to be able to sort of show what you could and should be doing anyway. That's a whole window of time that you could be doing damage. So whatever portion you're in your rotation, if you go, oh crap, now I gotta leave. If you then go to grenades and you're doing this, throwing my mine, and then I'm sitting there chucking grenades to the moment that it's no longer corners, and then I go back and I leap back into action.
Tossing grenades behind.
What was that?
I said your Sora looks hilarious running away, tossing grenades behind.
It's great to be able to do. This is why I really don't recommend that people do. And I'm sorry if I bum anyone out with this. With what is this called? Action Cam. Action Cam makes it very hard to look one direction and cast skills in another. So it can be really, really difficult to try to do those things together. But these are the things I mean, like capitalizing on damage at every moment that you have to be doing a mechanic. There's always something in every class with every boss. And if you guys want to come back on Thursday night, Phoenix, Cryptic, and I will all be back here again, sort of going over actual encounters. So hopefully we'll see you guys at that point.
That is about our time. So, Cryptic, if you have any other closing thoughts to add?
Yeah, there was two things. One, real quick, I just wanted to, you brought up the VG thing about your Axe 5 and the teleport. If you have quickness, which you should, and you start Axe 5 as the teleport appears underneath you, you can actually get like 75% of it before the teleport takes you away. So there's an example of, like, I mean, obviously you shouldn't have started it as the teleport happened, but when you get to know mechanics and you understand how your class and the boss, the raid fight actually works, that's an example of where you can greed responsibly, right? Like, you know that if you end your Axe 5 before the teleport goes off, and by dodging, you'll be fine. But if you you don't want to dodge right away to give up that damage, you can greed responsibly and get 50-70% of it done and then dodge. So stuff like that, that's important to keep in mind. And there's something else I was going to say, but it slipped my mind.
I'm just so glad you brought up the KC thing. That was the origin of the term greed responsibly, which is so important. It's one of the easiest situations where people try to greed some DPS right after the orb collecting phase in KC, when he's doing what our guild affectionately calls the danger donut, but I've heard many other things. Grinder, I think, is another one. The blender, yeah. Blender, slice, the pizza slice attack, I don't know, whatever it is. The thing that he does right after that, if you're standing inside the hitbox, you take a lot of damage. And this is probably the most consistently dangerous greed moment that exists. Whenever we're hosting a training raid, we have markers, right? And you're supposed to stack it at green arrow, or at least orient yourself to green arrow again, because we're all around the boss catching orbs, right? And then when I'm hosting a training, I usually say, okay, keep collecting orbs. Just attack the boss in the middle to get some healing from Healing Spring or whatever, or Heal Spirit, or whatever it's called, Water Spirit. And then once it gets close to the end of the phase, I tell everyone, okay, start looking around for green arrow and orient yourself so you know where it is. right? And then as soon as the phase ends, I want everyone to come over here. And usually when I'm training it, have everyone actually stack it arrow and maybe just chuck grenades. You know, like do range damage so we can all be stacked together, easily healing each other, not getting damaged by the, what do you call it? Blender?
Yeah.
Blender. By the blender. But when you get more comfortable and you know how to greed responsibly, the name of the game tends to be to stand just outside of the blender range and try to reach the boss. This is a nuanced thing. It's going to depend on the class that you are bringing, but this is another huge bit of advice that I can give everybody. If you can go out of your way to see what your cleave range is, try to get a feel for how big your range is, how far you can hit a boss from, or even, like, depending on the class, what you can do that might just be ranged. If you're a power chrono, for example, you could just chuck phantasms and basically do nothing but range damage for almost the entire duration of the time that he is doing his blender attack. So it just kind of depends. But like, I always like to laugh with people. Do you see how far? Do you see how, this is the small hitbox? This is a small hitbox. His hitbox is this size. Do you see what the bomb range on this is? I'm hitting from here. It's absurd. Reaper is even more than that. Did you see how I just moved a tiny bit and now I'm out of the range? That's how close I'm familiar with the range. I knew that this about would be the range to hit the thing, even though his hitbox is that far away. Do you think I'm going to take damage from the blender at this range? Of course not. I can do Spin to Win and Shroud 4 and Reaper from outside of the spikes on Samurag and hit her in the alcove while she's back there doing the fly swatter. Like, if you learn what the range on your skills are, you can do so much more and do it so much safer. So just spending some time inside of the SFTA, getting to know your auto attack chains, getting to know your range, and reading your skills. You know, I think it's probably going to net you a bigger gain than you might think.
Yeah, we'll talk about this more in the boss specific ones, but like the opposite of what Merrick was saying with for Bomb there with Hollow and Scrapper and stuff. Soul Beast is very short range. The Great Sword on KC, you're just able to, and obviously Longbow, you're just able to do it, the skills outside the Danger Donut. The Axe 5, you're not. You have to actually step inside of it. But it's important to remember that, you know, greeting responsibly, if you have your health topped off, or if you don't pop your heal, and then, you know, tiptoe in, do the Axe 5, and then step out, dodge out, whatever the case may be, and you'll be fine. You know, don't be like, oh, my axe doesn't reach from outside the Danger Donut. Let me stand in the hitbox and do all my greatsword skills, and then my axe, and then my greatsword. Oh, now I'm dead. You know, do your greatsword stuff, swap the axe, just do the Axe 5, and then back out. I remembered what I wanted to ask. It's actually a question. We have a lot of, at least a couple of really good raiders in the chat right now. Something that's been bothering me that I've always wanted to know, two things about, well, raiding in general, but I guess the SFTA, is one, I've been told that hitting your auto attack key actually reduces your damage that the auto attacks would do, as opposed to just letting the chain happen on its own. Can anyone confirm that? We have like,
I was recently told that it is not all auto attack chains, and quite specifically the Hollowsmith one. That's what I was recently told.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay.
Yeah, weird thing. If you spam auto attack chains, that's another thing to keep in mind. And again, dude, we could talk for forever. But like spamming auto attack chains in Photon Forge, apparently just pressing 1. You know how you kind of do this just while all you're doing is attacking, you're just hitting that 1 key. That'll actually reduce your damage. And it's also super scary on Reaper, because if you press 1, it'll actually cancel the Spin to Win that is the biggest damage portion of your rotation. And that's actually true of a lot of builds, that if you press 1 all willy-nilly, it will actually interrupt something that might be important, which is kind of weird. What skills interrupt what other skills is like a whole class all by itself. It's so weird.
Oh, that's good to know. I hope somebody in chat just said they fixed it. I hope they fixed it, because I'm a rhythmic player, so not being able to hit the button kind of bothers me.
Oh, dude, yeah, man. I have a really hard time not spamming that 1 key. It's what keeps my APM up. Like, I don't like big gaps when I'm doing nothing.
Same. But another thing I'm curious about, anybody notice when you spawn a golem, if you do damage to it the moment it spawns, you do like 50% of its health?
No. What?
Here, wait. Get rid of the golem. Don't respawn it right away. I'll take Mind Kit to demonstrate this. All right, spawn. It normally does more than that, but still.
Although that is
one,
11%. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's one skill. I've seen it do up to 50% when I was messing around with PBM before. And when you spawned it earlier, you can actually go back in the stream. I was still autoing with my sword when you spawned it, and I did like 25% of itself.
Weird. It must start at like a static percentage and then be raised to whatever it actually is.
Yeah, that's probably it. You're right.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we're probably going to call it here for this particular training. Thank you all very much for being a part of it. For those of you who are just hanging out in the stream, I will continue. We're going to start another 2 hours of actual raiding in just about 15 minutes. But this has been Phoenix, Jadefire, Cryptic Villain, and MaericTV hosting this sort of
Dragon
DPS
Sake
masterclass. So thank you guys so much for being a part of it. Definitely check out, remember I told you the best thing you could possibly do to increase your DPS is to learn the raid encounters so that you are no longer panickedly reacting to mechanics and instead calmly anticipating them. And the best way to do that is to actually go to Phoenix's amazing website that she just concluded. It is huge. It is amazing. It needs more attention. Trust me, it is an all-encompassing Guild Wars 2 raid source of knowledge. Okay, and as all of us in Guild Wars 2 know, it has been very difficult to get all the information that we need up to date all in one place. It is ridiculous. It is totally difficult to find, but now this resource is huge. So make sure right now, guys, go click on that, bookmark it. It's going to be a really good resource to go to when you're learning raids. And remember, we will be back Thursday. So if you have any questions between now and then, write them down. PM me in Discord or just in stream chat anytime. We can talk about them, but we will be addressing a lot more same time Thursday night, 9 p.m. EST.